Oh, you guys. New Berserk chapter day is always a wonderful day. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day. And it might be small, it might finish really quick, but damn, it feels good. It's just like my sex life. And obviously, if you clicked on this video, you either read the chapter already or you don't care about spoilers, because I'm just going to spoil the shit out of this and go into a lot of thoughts and theories and things that have been confirmed throughout the entire series of Berserk. So much is revealed within just this one chapter of mysteries that have been lingering for literal decades. It is absolutely incredible about how much Kentaro Miura was able to jam pack in here. So the Berserker armor starts going crazy, and Hanar wraps a bunch of chains around it, Hellraiser style, still got those Hellraiser influences, and I bring up Hellraiser again because we are going to see, well, we'll get there. You got Skull Knight here, you got Gedfring, you got Hanar the Blacksmith, and you've got Shirake and Morda. And Hanar is saying that he is going to show Guts a memory that is seeped into the armor. So the armor itself, as was worn by its previous user, which is the Skull Knight, we already knew this before going in, but contains some sort of magical property in order to retain memories of the visions of what Skull Knight saw while he wore the armor. So this is a very interesting concept about the Berserker armor in general, and the fact that it can kind of hold memories in between previous users. And it's also a very creative way to give Guts a vision of something that would need to be explained exposition-wise within the story, but it creates a kind of narrative purpose to give him that exposition. Whereas now it's not like he just has to sit down with Skull Knight and have him talk to him for an hour. Instead, he can kind of see what's happening. And also the things with the Berserker armor really relate to what's going on with Guts. But I'll get to that in just a second after I explain what exactly we got to see here. Now, the first thing we see is a vision of the eclipse of some sort, and it looks gigantic. It looks so much bigger than the one that we saw with Griffith. And the reason for that is this is most likely, again, not 100% confirmed. There still are a lot of mysteries here and still are a lot of teases here. It gives you just enough information so you can kind of like put the pieces together yourself, and it doesn't explicitly tell you, which is a perfect way to do it. But we see a gigantic, huge eclipse here with a bunch of weird, kind of crazy tentacles and scaly looking like creatures that, instead of like having the Balit faces that were everywhere that was with Griffith's eclipse, this one looks like it's just like a primal, kind of like prehistoric one, is almost like what it looks like to me. And we see an image of the shadows of the God Hand in the background, and behind them, of course, the swirling vortex of souls, or like the Berserk version of hell, where all these souls go to suffer for all of eternity. And then we see a POV shot, and actually I don't know, there's probably lots of other people that called this as well, but I called that the visions of the Berserker armor that you would see would be in first person, so Guts would be getting a first person view of what happened, and that's what we as the reader would see as we're reading it, a first person view. So I really like that I called that and that it was actually what happened here. So very, very cool. Pat myself on the back for that one. But we also get to see a bunch of apostles ripped apart. If you look really closely, these apostles are being absolutely demolished and like destroyed, being cut in half. And we know that with the Berserker armor, this is possible. So this tells me that Skull Knight had his Berserker armor during his eclipse. And this is very, very important, and I'll get to that in just a moment, again, after I finish just kind of briefly summarizing the chapter. But this is very, very important that Skull Knight had the Berserker armor actually during the eclipse itself. But then before we even get a chance to really think about that, we see the next image, which kind of completely blows our fucking mind. And this is a huge game changer of the entire series of Berserk, because we see the one God Hand that we know, Void. First of all, this is Void's first appearance really since like the actual eclipse in the Golden Age. I know there was that one panel, close-up of a brain at the end of Falcon of the Millennium Empire, but like here's a real actual like establishing shot of Void, and oh my god, it does my heart so well to see Void back in action. At least even just he's standing there still, not doing anything except looking menacingly. But oh my god, it's awesome. But the thing here that we see behind Void are 4 other creatures that are potentially 4 previous members of the God Hand. And this is absolutely monumental for the series of Berserk. This confirms, well, not necessarily confirms, but really kind of shoves in the right direction of so many theories that have been out there about the God Hand basically recycling itself as it goes through time and history. Whereas once there's 5, then years later, one is cycled out for a new one, and it just kind of continues this trend. Now, that's not necessarily the case. That's not necessarily what's being confirmed here at all. But like I said, it is kind of pushing in that direction of that narrative where the God Hand is not eternal. They're not around forever. They're here to enact the will of the idea of evil. Again, whether or not you want to consider the idea of evil chapter canon or not, I believe most fans do, so we're just going to run with it. They are here to enact the will of the idea of evil, right? And so the God Hand themselves aren't necessarily eternal beings that are going to be around forever. And if there is a new eclipse that needs to happen every 216 years, add 216 up 5 times, you get 1080, which goes a little bit over the 1,000 year mark. Maybe there's a reason for that. I'm not sure. I'm sure there is eventually, because Kentaro Miura has thought this all out his entire life. But it does go to show that the God Hand then, 1,000 years ago, were essentially completely different except for Void. Void standing in the center here also seems to symbolize that this was Void's eclipse. So Void and the Skull Knight did have something to do with each other. They did know each other, and since he's kind of standing here looking like a leader, looking like a symbolic representation of like the new God Hand, the new kid on the block, and he's like looming down looking at Skull Knight with that kind of condescending look, the same way that Femto looked down on Guts. We can definitely assume that this was his ascension. So we can assume that he sacrificed Geyseric's entire kingdom, destroyed it. It was, torn to pieces by apostles, and he became the 5th and final God Hand of that era. Now then we also cut to Guts, and I really like this image because, I mean, I don't know if this was necessarily intentional, but you see the image of the Berserker armor in kind of the wolf, hound, mad dog persona that Guts is, and then it cuts back to what Skull Knights would have looked like, just a skull helmet, and then you see the back of a character that he's holding in his hand, and because of the hair, the way that it's drawn and the color of it, you kind of almost look at it like Griffith, like, oh, maybe that, that could be like Griffith in Guts' arms, kind of the similarity there. Again, as time being a spiral, things are the same but a little bit different, because Guts did hold Griffith in his arms like that, and then Skull Knight held someone else. From the looks of it, it was a woman, and we can clearly see that she has the brand of sacrifice on her shoulder, and she also has a very like elf island style of attire. So again, this would lead me to believe that Skull Knight knew everything about magic and elves and everything like that before his eclipse. So this is very different than Guts, where Guts didn't kind of learn about any of the stuff or get the Berserker armor until after the eclipse. Geyseric had all his beforehand. So it leads me to believe that Geyseric conquered like almost everything that there was out there, including Elfhelm at the time, or at least had an awareness of it, or at least, had some sort of connection to it, which might add into why Puck feels that, he feels kind of like an elf, or something like that along those lines. So I just feel like Geyseric had a connection to magic or magical things before this even happened. And of course, in the next image, we see her kind of fall back, assumingly dying, and we see the giant brand of sacrifice in the background, most likely symbolizing the entire kingdom. So Shirake jumps on Guts' back and does her thing to kind of bring him back. The helmet goes down, and Guts talks about, like, I just saw, like, the end of everything. And then Skull Knight says, what you saw was the end of a foolish king, talking about himself, most likely, and saying that you saw the beginning of a dead man stalking the endless nights, meaning that this was the moment where Skull Knight most likely died. Okay, so that's a brief summary of what happened. So now we have a few gigantic things to talk about. One thing is, if this is when Skull Knight did die, if this is when the Berserker armor rage took over, because you have to imagine, if he's watching his entire kingdom be torn to pieces, and he's watching, assumingly, his wife or his lover or whoever it is, somebody very, very important to him, dying in his arms, then you could definitely say that this would have pushed him past the point of a near endless rage. If he's wearing the Berserker armor that brings out, your rage, your fury, your beast of darkness, the hatred, the anger within you to to make you fight at your top capacity, then this would be the thing to do it. He probably fought to his heart's content. There was an endless amount of apostles. He was slaying them down and down and down until he just couldn't do it anymore, bled out and died. That is my theory on that. However, if this is when Skull Knight died, then there had to be a way for Skull Knight's soul released from the Berserker armor and be put into the skull armor that he has now. So that's a factor there that's kind of lingering too, because how did that happen? Somebody must have been there in order to transfer his soul from one vessel to the other. So that's still kind of like in the ether of like wondering what exactly happened. Also, what is this horse from? He's got to have some like super powerful horse, you know, skull horse. Come on. Also, the major thing I want to point out with Skull Knight having the Berserker armor during the eclipse is, so as we know, Flora has talked about how time is a spiral in the world of Berserk, where things happen over and over again, similarly, but just a little bit different each time. And one big difference that could be here, that could be a deciding factor in changing things maybe for the better moving forward, is exactly when the character of the struggler, being Skull Knight and then now being Guts, received the Berserker armor. Because think about this, imagine this, if Guts had the Berserker armor during the eclipse, then yes, he would have died, because he was in such a raged out, like insane, like he went berserk, literally, like the title of the series, there you go, during the eclipse, and it would have destroyed him. He would have done the same thing and bled out. However, he did not have the Berserker armor at this point. Also, when Skull Knight broke in to save Guts, he saved Casca as well. And I'm thinking that maybe that was again for a strategic reason. Maybe he didn't save Casca because he's some ultimate grand hero. Maybe he saved Casca because Casca represents whatever this woman represented for him. And she died, and that was a catalyst for him losing himself to the Berserker armor. So now, flashing forward, if he saves Casca with Guts from the eclipse and they both survive, that is another ripple in the water that can change things moving forward. If she's still alive and still is, you know, the light that, you know, keeps his darkness at bay, just that little bit, just enough so that the armor doesn't take over completely. If she's there, you know, because almost every time that Guts was in the armor going crazy, we saw either the Moonlight Child show him, look at Casca, you have to look at Casca, you know, like she is the important thing. She is the thing, the barrier between losing himself to that armor. And so that might have something to do with it. Again, this is just my theory. This is not something that's explicitly stated in the chapter. I'm just taking these little puzzle pieces and trying to put them together. So I'm saying that what if Skull Knight saved Casca in order to help Guts further on his journey in a way that Skull Knight himself couldn't be helped because the love of his life, his woman, did die during the eclipse. And so now if we want to look at the GODHAND thing, okay, so if there were another crew of GODHAND and Void wound up being the fifth one, well, it's usually stated that like every 1,000 years or whatever, you know, a GODHAND would be incarnated back on Earth. Either that 1,080 year difference, the 80 years prior to the 1,000 is actually when Void became Void, and then at the 1,000 year mark he was incarnated and either created the Holy See religion or did something, you know, another kind of massive sacrifice in order to kind of restart the GODHAND process. I don't know if that's at all possible, but that is kind of a theory that you could throw in there. Because you also have to think, what is the point of Falconia to begin with? What is the point of bringing Griffith back and luring everybody in there? Probably some other kind of massive sacrifice. So what I'm saying is maybe with Void there were two sacrifices. There was his eclipse and there was his incarnation, which then either destroyed the kingdom or destroyed something more than that, and then kind of built the world from the ground up again in order to perpetuate perhaps whatever the idea of evil is. You know, the more I keep thinking about it and the more I think about the idea of evil stuff, whereas, you know, it's pretty simplistic. The idea of evil is, you know, the representation of all of the kind of darkness in humanity, right? You know, humans wanting a reason and then the idea of creating that reason over and over. And so maybe the will of the idea of evil is actually really simple. Maybe all it wants to do is just to continue its own existence. And in order to do that, it has to keep people in a kind of a barbaric warring state's age. You know, it has to keep people from progressing. I don't know. Again, I'm just kind of throwing out all these different theories after reading this chapter because it was such a short chapter, but it gives you so much to think about. I don't know. There's so many possibilities, and that's the thing about Berserk. It shows you all these reveals, it shows you all of these things, and it reveals so much, but at the same time, it gives you so many questions. And I guess, in a way, that's just good storytelling. But anyway, also I just want to shout out one of my Patreon supporters and his Etsy store, Coolio Magnets, down below. He made these awesome Berserk magnets that you can check out. They're very cool. They shift from Guts into Rage mode into the Berserker armor, which again is very relevant to the chapter we were seeing. Anyways, they're very cool. Check them out. Check out the Instagram down below and the Etsy store. They're fairly cheap. They're really cool to have. So I would definitely recommend you guys check that out in the description. Down below is where you can find all of that. Again, Coolio Magnets, Berserk magnets, they're pretty awesome, so go ahead and check them out. That way next time you get an A on your math test and you're really proud of it, you can stick it to the fridge with that Berserk rage. Anyways, guys, other than that, let me know what you think about the chapter down below. Go ahead and fill it with your thoughts, your comments, your theories, anything that you think was revealed that I didn't mention or will lead to further reveals in the story going down the road. Any kind of ideas you have of what these five different God Hand mean. Anything about Berserk wearing the Berserker armor. How did his soul get transferred from point A to point B? Anything like that, put it all down below. I want to hear all of your thoughts because this is probably one of the biggest chapters of Berserk that we've ever gotten, or at least probably the biggest new chapter since I became a fan of Berserk. So again, let me know what you think down below in the comments. Thanks as always for watching this video, guys. I really do appreciate it. Like I said, check in the description below and check out those magnets. Go ahead and order yourself one. Other than that, I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you next time.